The curtain rises on season 2, and what we're shown is less a home and more a stage. Set a $10 million rental masquerading as a humble cottage, while the real house, worth nearly double up the road, sits untouched. Meghan wants the audience to believe she's the barefoot Duchess of Montecito, plucking ripe tomatoes, sprinkling flower petals, and tending to a Disney-grade garden where every bloom is on cue and every tomato looks like it was spray-painted by Pixar. It's a performance of simplicity, but one so polished that it feels synthetic, like watching a fairy tale reenacted by someone who's never actually lived in one. And then comes her big culinary wisdom for the premier keep puff pastry in the freezer. Not how to make it, not how to elevate it, not even how to use it, just have it frozen. The line lands with the weight of a royal decree delivered as though she were unveiling Newton's law or penning scripture. Daniel Martin, her longtime makeup artist and unfortunate first guest, nods so vigorously you'd think she just solved world hunger. His smile never wavers, but the tension in his eyes betrays him. He looks like a man drafted into service the blink of his lashes, reading like Morse code for help. This is how the season begins, a grand illusion wrapped in puff pastry. The supposed food show that teaches nothing, the supposed intimate home that isn't hers, and a supposed best friend guest who radiates all the joy of someone tied to their chair. The mismatch is jarring. Daniel smiles like a loyal court jester, while Meghan beams with the force of someone auditioning for sainthood, overjoyed at her own advice about frozen dough. If this is episode 1's big reveal, then one has to wonder, what on earth will the finale hold? Will Meghan teach us the divine art of opening bottled water? Because when the curtain call of authenticity is this hollow, every new scene risks collapsing under the weight of its own performance. But the illusion didn't stop there, because when it came time for the big celebrity guest reveal, the moment that should have anchored the season with star power, the curtain lifted only to show Daniel again, yes, the same Daniel who doubles as her makeup artist and now unwilling leading man. Viewers expecting Oprah Clooney, or even a B-list cameo, were left blinking in disbelief. Instead of glamour, we got a man whose presence felt less like a booking and more like an obligation, parroting lines of excitement while radiating the subtle dread of someone rehearsing escape routes in their head. Then, in a bizarre twist, actual chefs appeared: David Chang and Christina Tosi. Real talent, real charisma, and suddenly the contrast was brutal. Their ease on camera, their casual flow, their genuine smiles, all of it made Meghan's presence ache with stiffness. While they moved with natural rhythm, she seemed trapped in her own performance, smiling so intensely it looked painful, nodding with the cadence of a sitcom character studying how normal humans behave. And there stood Daniel again, nodding as though her suggestion of an onion tart was akin to reinventing cuisine itself, his loyalty unwavering, his eyes begging for release. The absurdity peaked with the now infamous puff pastry sermon. Meghan delivered the line, "You should always keep puff pastry in your freezer," with the gravity of someone revealing the cure to a terminal disease. The room froze. Daniel beamed. The chefs played along politely, and the audience at home couldn't decide whether to laugh or wince. It was less culinary advice and more indoctrination, like a mantra in a pastry cult where dissent is forbidden and frozen dough is scripture. And then came the fakest flourish of all, a voiceover stitched in after the fact. In one scene, Meghan is shown smiling silently, but a line about rethinking baking to be more spontaneous floats over the footage. Her lips never move. The wisdom was manufactured in post-production, a Frankenstein moment of editing meant to paint her as profound. Poor Daniel, responds live on set. So true, as though he's echoing an oracle, when in reality he's reacting to words that were never actually spoken. The result is eerie, unsettling proof that even her supposed spontaneity must be engineered after the cameras stop rolling. At that point, the show no longer looked like a food series. It looked like reality itself was being patched together, a carefully fabricated shrine where the hosts' every pause, every smile, every word had to be stitched into something resembling depth. But the harder the edit tried to mask the cracks, the wider they became. This was less a cooking show and more a shrine with aprons, and the ritual continued when Meghan unveiled her gifts to the guest scarves she had made herself through something called water marbling. What should have been a thoughtful gesture felt more like a ceremonial test of loyalty. Here is this oddly blotched fabric I dipped in colored water. Now accept it with awe. Smile on cue and remember who bestowed it upon you. It wasn't generosity. It was a power play disguised as kindness, the sort of gift that demands gratitude without offering joy. From there, the kitchen segment descended into something even stranger. Meghan moved like a person who had studied YouTube tutorials on cooking, but never dared to try them in real life. She hovered near the stove with the nervousness of someone standing beside a ticking bomb, spilled things she should have mastered, and stared into the oven as though it might explode. This wasn't culinary mastery. It was performance anxiety broadcast in high definition. Watching her fumble through fried eggs, puff pastry, and marshmallows was less like watching a meal come together and more like witnessing a sleepover spiral out of control. And yet every plate, no matter how uninspired, was received as if it were the Sistine Chapel in pastry form. Guests bit into onion tarts with exaggerated gasps, praising them as though they contained secrets of the universe. One even declared, "This is one of the most joyful days I've ever had." The line was delivered with such overblown sincerity that the only plausible explanation was chemical intervention. Surely the production team had someone on standby with syringes of artificial euphoria, because no onion tart on earth has ever triggered that kind of rapture. It was cult theater disguised as cuisine, a place where frozen pastry with scripture scarves were relics, and even the most trivial moments were elevated into holy experiences. Daniel, still nodding like a faithful acolyte, played the role of the eternally loyal believer, while the professional chefs looked increasingly like pilgrims who had accidentally stumbled into a ceremony they didn't sign up for. And through it all, Meghan remained at the center, orchestrating the scene with an intensity that blurred the line between hosting and preaching. Every glance, every gesture, every plate placed on the table demanded reverence. Oh, it wasn't about food or fellowship or even fun. It was about control of the room, the narrative, and above all, the illusion that this shrine of puff pastry and scarves was anything other than what it really was, a performance designed to worship the woman at its center. And the performance only grew more surreal when the cameras moved outside, where Meghan guided her guests into the garden for what was billed as flower arranging, but played out more like a ceremonial rite. They snipped at weeds and stuffed them haphazardly into vases, yet every crooked stem was treated as though it carried divine symbolism. The garden became her temple, the daisies her disciples, and Meghan, their high priestess, gasping dramatically at every petal as if each bloom whispered secrets only she could hear. It was in this bizarre atmosphere that Meghan unveiled her next self-comparison, the samurai. She lit up as she explained how warriors of old practiced calligraphy and flower arranging, seizing the chance to cast herself as their spiritual descendant. The absurdity was almost majestic. Here was a woman fumbling with puff pastry in one breath and declaring kinship with ancient warriors in the next. The chefs nodded politely. Daniel nodded compulsively, and the entire scene teetered on the edge of parody, except no one dared laugh. Then came the lavender honey revelation. Out of nowhere, Meghan suggested pairing it with graham crackers, and the table reacted as though she had unlocked the key to human survival. Gasps, applause, reverent murmurs. It was culinary theater at its most exaggerated. Christina Tosi, a celebrated chef in her own right, managed to gasp. That's the most amazing idea, with the conviction of someone who understood that dissent wasn't an option. Lavender honey in that moment was treated not as an ingredient, but as a revolution. The tension in the room was suffocating, not because of conflict, but because of absence, an absence of honesty, of spontaneity, of anyone willing to pierce the bubble of her ego. Every sentence Meghan uttered was received as gospel. Every awkward pause was filled with anxious affirmation, and every guest tiptoed as though a single wrong word could detonate the set. It wasn't camaraderie, it was hostage etiquette dressed up in designer florals. And as the laughter at home grew louder, the atmosphere on screen grew heavier, weighed down by the unbearable need to protect the illusion. Because in Meghan's world, a suggestion about honey could spark a standing ovation, but a moment of silence might reveal the truth everyone was working so hard to hide. And then came the moment of revelation, the supposed emotional center of the entire spectacle. Meghan, seated with her exhausted guests, looked directly into the camera and declared with gravity, "There have been so many chapters." She spoke the line with the solemnity of a war veteran recounting battle scars, as though climbing Hollywood's social ladder and navigating red carpets were equivalent to surviving epics of human struggle. It wasn't a confession, it was a book title. She seemed desperate to manifest a tagline for the autobiography she's been writing in real time. But the theatrics didn't end there. The flower arranging returned not as a passing activity, but as a ritualistic finale. Guests who had already endured puff pastry sermons and lavender honey revelations were now conscripted once more into plucking weeds and placing them in vases as though arranging roadside plants was an act of national service. Meghan stood at the center conducting this awkward orchestra of broken spirits, correcting stems, praising placements, and gasping with the intensity of someone who believed daisies could transmit souls. And just when the performance seemed ready to collapse under its own absurdity, the editing delivered one last betrayal. Another voiceover appeared lines of supposed wisdom retrofitted into her smiling silence, while Daniel, loyal to the end, reacted in real time as if she had actually spoken. The disconnect was chilling, a ghostly echo of a conversation that never existed, proof that spontaneity itself had to be fabricated in post-production. Then the credits rolled, and the very first name to appear was Meghan's Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. It was the perfect summary of the entire show. She may have stepped away from the monarchy, but the title remains her armor, the one symbol she refuses to release, the final thread that ties her identity to the power she insists she doesn't need. It isn't irony, it's strategy. And in that moment, the show revealed its truest self. It wasn't about cooking or guests or authenticity. It was about constructing a world where Meghan is always the centerpiece, the victim, the hero, the misunderstood genius. But the harder she clutched the narrative, the faker it looked. Because ironically, the only thing this carefully edited spectacle truly succeeded in was showing us exactly who Meghan is not, through her rehearsed lines, not through her orchestrated smiles, but through the cracks in the performance she couldn't quite conceal.